With the first game in the NFL season in the books, we didn't have to wait long for an upset. The Detroit Lions took down the Kansas City Chiefs last night, and I got to tell you, this game probably would have gone different if Travis Kelce and Chris Jones had both played for the Chiefs, but they didn't last night, and that was kind of the big determining factor in this game, I would say. First thing I want to talk about here with the Lions is this split among the running backs between Montgomery and Gibbs. Gibbs definitely looked like the more electric player, averaging 6 yards a carry, and broke a couple big plays in the passing game as well. David Montgomery got 21 carries, which you love to see in fantasy. No catches for Montgomery, however, so PPR upside, not too great. He found the end zone, which Gibbs potentially could have. He stumbled in the red zone and kind of acted like he was back in college, didn't really fight through the play. But that's a learning curve with a rookie player, so that's to be expected. I do expect, however, this split of like 70-30 to trend closer to a 50-50. Eventually, I think Gibbs is going to take the lead job because he is so talented. Like he looked really explosive out there, and I was really impressed with what I saw from him. On the other side, how about this? 4 for 4 on receptions for Isaiah Pacheco. That's pretty unexpected. I mean, the fact that Jerick McKinnon had barely any usage really surprised me. If Pacheco can continue that, obviously they weren't very effective on the ground in general, but Pacheco being in the passing game kind of changes his value a lot this season. So we'll have to monitor that continuing through the season. On to the receivers. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown looked great. 9 targets, 6 catches. Hard to complain. He found the end zone as well. You love to see that. On the other side of this game, you could really tell they were missing Travis Kelce. They had a slew of receivers taking targets and not doing a whole lot. Least of which, Kadarius Toney. This was a really bad game for him. 1 catch for 1 yard and essentially a drop that resulted in a pick six. It's a shame that counts against Mahomes, but that's how the game's played. Toney did not look good at all, and that's pretty concerning because I think, obviously Sky Moore was getting a lot of buzz closer to the season start, which now I'm seeing, I don't even think he registered a catch, which I feel like I saw him catch a ball, but maybe not. Either way, Toney looked bad. Honestly, this was a big win for Rashee Rice, who I happen to roster in this league. He found the end zone for the Chiefs in his rookie debut, and had similar targets to guys that have been there a lot longer than him, Kadarius Toney, for instance. But either way, this was not a great display from the Chiefs offense in week 1. The tight ends, Sam Laporta, I think he has some serious value season long. This performance here kind of gives me some hope that a rookie tight end might make some noise this year. So that's kind of my takeaway from this game. Let's now go on to the first game on the slate here, and that's Carolina at Atlanta. The first thing I want to talk about is these running backs here. Chuba Hubbard, Tyler Algier, probably not going to look to flex either of those guys. I don't expect Algier to not have a role at all. I mean, he's got a 9-point projection here, but I think it's going to be the Bijan Robinson show. It should be. They drafted him very high in the draft. He should get used pretty heavily. Moving on to the receivers here, Drake London is kind of the only guy that I'm really comfortable starting, even as a flex. Thielen, I need to see it before I trust him again. He burned me quite a bit last season. Definitely starting to show his age at 32 years old. DJ Chark is potentially going to miss this game. There's reports indicating that he may be resting until week 2, given his hamstring issue. So, I mean, I don't think you're really going out of your way to start DJ Chark either. So that's kind of that. The tight ends here, Hayden Hurst, Kyle Pitts. I think if you have either of those guys, you're probably starting them. There's not a whole lot of depth at tight end, so it's kind of what you have is what you got. All right, moving on to the next game. Dobbins. I think this is a great opportunity for J.K. Dobbins at home against the Houston Texans to come out the gates hot and then sell high. Now, you may or may not know, I'm not a huge J.K. Dobbins fan. Don't really believe in him as a player to stay healthy. And for that reason, I think this is a great opportunity, if he does show out in this first game, to consider selling high on that. I think that would be a smart move. I don't expect a season-long top 24 finish for Dobbins, personally. Moving on to the receivers here. Nico Collins in a deeper flex consideration in a deeper league, maybe. Tank Dell, probably not in his first game as a rookie. Similar thing with Zay Flowers. I would prefer to see it before I invest a lot in, or really, count on that player in the first game of the season. Odell Beckham has an issue with his ankle currently and found himself on the injury report on Thursday. So that's something to monitor. That could be an opportunity for Rashad Bateman to step up, with also Mark Andrews with his quad issue. These are going to be players to watch in this offense. I mean, this is all kind of trending towards a big game for J.K. Dobbins, like I said. Lamar Jackson obviously will do his thing. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at with that game. Dalton Schultz, I think, is startable at tight end as well. And let's move on to the next game. So with this one, Mixon, Chubb, you're definitely starting those guys, obviously. I think Elijah Moore is probably the cutoff for this game in terms of if you're willing to risk that play at flex. Obviously, Amari Cooper is going to be in your lineup. He has historically been a strong performer at home. This game happens to be at home, so I am expecting pretty good things from Cooper. Elijah Moore, like I said, he's got a wide range of outcomes, especially week one. So flex at your own risk, I would say. Tyler Boyd, I think you got to have better options than Boyd to flex. He's definitely found himself in the number 3 role on this offense, and it's possible he could be surpassed by Irv Smith, who has shown a lot of talent in his brief time on the field in the NFL. But I think that this is a really good landing spot for him. We saw Hayden Hurst was pretty effective at tight end with Cincinnati a few seasons ago, and so he's kind of a sleeper pick for me at tight end. David Njoku, of course, I talked about in my tight end rankings video how I like his connection with Deshaun Watson. Seems to have more touchdown upside with Watson at quarterback, and that's what you're looking for from your tight end overall generally. All right, next matchup here, Jacksonville at Indianapolis. So if you're starting Anthony Richardson, you are basically hoping for upside via his rushing game. I think that given the fact that there will not be any Jonathan Taylor, Deion Jackson should be the main guy. And it's important to note that last season in Week 6, Deion Jackson was the RB1 against these same Jaguars on a 10-reception day. I don't expect that to be repeated this week, but it's good to know that in a pinch, Deion Jackson can be played and flexed, and I think that he can this week as well. Not flexing Tank Bigsby. Want to see what that split looks like. Obviously, the Gibbs and Montgomery split may be something to expect in this backfield as well. Moving on to the receivers. Calvin Ridley, this will be his first game in over a year, and he could show some rust, although, the training camp videos would indicate that he's looking good. With that being said, I think both of these guys, Ridley and Kirk, should be in your lineup. Pittman, I think probably should be in your lineup, although I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to wait and see. If you had the flexibility to wait and see on how he performed in this game, I would definitely would recommend that if you can. With the tight ends here, Evan Ingram, that's the only one in this game worth starting. And we'll move on to the next game. So here we go. All right. With the wide receivers here, obviously Godwin and Evans are in your lineup. I think there is going to be a bit of a learning curve with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, but I think that those guys are just too talented to stay outside of your lineup, honestly. And the cutoff for me here is Jordan Addison. I think if you need to start Addison because you're in a deeper league, you start multiple flexes in your roster, then Addison can make your lineup, but I just like with Zay Flowers and Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we'll talk about later, those are all guys that I'd like to see prove it before I put them in my lineup, if you can avoid it. With the tight ends, obviously Hawkinson, Kate Otten, probably not the move, maybe in DFS. All right, let's move on to the next game here. So with this one, honestly, the matchup is not that great for Jamal Williams. I don't think that he really makes a very compelling case for making your lineup this week. Given that matchup, I could be wrong, but I just feel like it's going to be more about the receivers on this team with Olave and Michael Thomas. I think Michael Thomas actually is going to perform well. He looked really, really good the first 3 games of last season. I'll go ahead and pull up those stats for you. So last year, 8 targets, 9 targets, 5 targets, a couple touchdowns here and there. I mean, he was performing well. You could see nearly double digits in every game, and that's what you're looking for from your flex. So I think Michael Thomas is going to be good this week. Treylon Burks, on the other hand, I'm a little sketchy on him. So he actually has a higher projection than Michael Thomas, and that surprises me a little bit. I think, honestly, the fact that these two players, Hopkins and Burks, are so close in projections is kind of strange. I think that what's more realistic is that Hopkins blows out Burks' production, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I'm leaning towards starting Hopkins in this league, given my roster. But anyway, I think that Chiro Okonkwo has that upside. I think you're good to play him if you need to. And let's move on to the next game. So 49ers at the Steelers. Obviously, the running backs here at the top, McCaffrey and Harris, they're making your lineup, no question. Elijah Mitchell, I wouldn't flex him if I could avoid it. I happen to be able to avoid it in this league, so I won't be doing so. On the receiving end, we've got Deebo Samuel, Deontay Johnson, Brandon Ayuk, George Pickens. I think all of those guys can make your roster, whether that's as a flex or as a starter, depending on the size of your league. So I'm fine with those guys. On the tight ends section, George Kittle has, excuse me, bit of a groin issue currently. And so he's a tough guy. He often plays through injury, and I honestly don't expect it to hold him back too much. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the tight end position. So with the ceiling that Kittle has access to here, like 33 points, 20 points, 27 points, 24 points, 26 points, this guy needs to make your lineup if he's healthy. That's kind of the bottom line. Pat Freiermuth, I think, he's going to retain his value, remain a consistent performer in fantasy. So I'm fine with you starting him, of course. Moving on to the next game, Arizona at Washington. Looks like Joshua Dobbs is going to be the starter for this team, and Sam Howell on the other side. I think both of those guys, this is going to be a pretty underwhelming game, I would say. That being said, Connor, Gibson, Brian Robinson, I like all of those players to make your lineup this week, whether that's starting or flex based on league size. Again, I'm not trying to be too repetitive, but that is kind of how I'm feeling about these guys. On the wide receiver section, Marquise Brown, I think he's going to score over 10 points. Honestly, the volume that this guy's going to receive in this offense is going to sustain fantasy relevance pretty much all season long, if he can stay healthy, of course. With McLaurin, he does have that turf toe issue. He practiced in full on Thursday, so that's good news for Terry McLaurin managers. Not as good for John Dotson managers like myself. But I think both of these guys, honestly, are going to be starting or are going to be flex consideration players, if not starters, depending on your league size. But anyway, tight ends here. I'm really surprised that Zach Ertz is projected this low. He is still limited with a knee issue, suffered an ACL and MCL tear last season. So it's not that surprising, I guess, but honestly, I think he's going to do more than 1.84. That being said, I'm not starting him, but just a player to keep an eye on as the season progresses. All right, next up, Packers at Bears. The running backs here, Aaron Jones. I'm not flexing A.J. Dillon. I did that too many times last year and never really saw the return on value, so I'm keeping him on the bench for as long as I can. Aaron Jones, however, should be still good. Should be a top 24 running back this week. Khalil Herbert only projected 11 points, and I feel like that has something to do with this split here that we're seeing between Foreman, Johnson, and Herbert. So obviously I do like Herbert the best out of the three. I ranked him the highest of the three in my running back ranking video. And we're just going to have to wait and see, honestly. This is kind of a sketchy spot. If you can avoid flexing Herbert, I would, just to kind of get a sense for what this split is going to look like. That being said, they are favored at home, so there is positive game script potentially there for Herbert, so that helps if you have to start him. Moving on to the receivers. Now, this Green Bay receiving room is all banged up. Christian Watson, non-participant Thursday. I believe it is hamstring there. Oh, that's Romeo Doubs. So both of these guys banged up. And what does that really mean for the pass catchers there? Well, I think it then becomes a question of, does Jaden Reed automatically become like wide receiver one in his rookie debut? Maybe. Luke Musgrave, he's getting a lot of hype after preseason performance. And honestly, I think the tight end position is kind of a mess. Cole Kmet, someone who is pretty touchdown dependent, also projected similar points to Musgrave. So I think in a deeper league, if you're kind of desperate at the position, these guys can make your lineup. But again, even if Jaden Reed is projected to be the number one guy, I wouldn't count on it. I really wouldn't. I would want to see what we get from him this week while he's on your bench, and then make that adjustment later on moving forward. So again, with the Chicago wide receivers, not really interested in Claypool. I need to see it from Mooney before I start him. DJ Moore is really the only guy that I'm comfortable starting, and I mean, the guy's really good. He really is. Obviously last season had its ups and downs with Baker Mayfield and PJ Walker and that whole situation in Carolina, but he had his moments, and I think that Justin Fields is going to continue to progress as a passer, and DJ Moore is definitely the most talented receiver that he's played with, so I like him from that perspective. All right, now we're moving on to the next game, which is the Raiders at the Broncos. And with this one, obviously Josh Jacobs is starting. Javonte Williams and P. Ryan are expected to be in a 50-50 split. So kind of think back to when Javonte was a rookie, Melvin Gordon, and Javonte splitting carries and touches and all that. Obviously, P. Ryan is not the player that Melvin Gordon was at that time. So Of the two, I do prefer Javonte Williams if I have both and I only can start one. Um, but I would, level expectations. I think that Javonte, obviously coming off of a big knee problem from last season, is going to, it's going to be a gradual improvement over the year. On to the receivers. Cortland Sutton is projected to be the guy. Jerry Jeudy still with a projection here. I don't expect him to play. Says he's going to listen to his body, and I think that's smart. It's a long season, 17-game season. Jerry Jeudy, definitely the most talented of the group when he's fully healthy. So get fully healthy and then start paying off for those who roster him. Devontae Adams, of course, is a no-brain starter. Jacoby Myers, I think, is startable, but he's got some risk associated with him for sure. Obviously in a new offense, although we saw him throwing passes for the Raiders before he was even on the Raiders. If you remember, you'll remember. But yeah, let's talk about the tight ends here. Michael Mayer, I think if you're in a deep league, that's an option at tight end. Greg Dulcich, losing snaps to Adam Troutman as Sean Payton's former, I guess they're not employees, but player, we'll say. And I think Greg Dulcich is still going to have the pass catching role, especially with Jerry Jeudy out of the lineup. I think that is someone that you can go to if you are a little desperate at the tight end position. Moving on to Philadelphia at New England. Running backs here, I think DeAndre Swift can be flexed. Ramondre Stevenson, of course, is going to start on your roster. These three guys down here, Gainwell, Penny, and Elliott, I would really like to wait and see what we get out of those guys in week one before starting them. So that's my advice for what it's worth. On to the wide receivers. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, obvious starters. Juju Smith-Schuster with his knee issue, which I don't know if this story is it's not going to talk about it. Either way, Juju is a player that I'm nervous about based on reports with his knee. I think you should start him because I don't think that there's really anyone else on this roster that is going to besides Ramondre Stevenson, who's going to really do a whole lot in the passing game. So if Juju is available, I think you flex him, and you just keep your fingers crossed that his knee doesn't explode at any moment. With the tight ends here, Dallas Goedert, obviously starting on your lineup. Hunter Henry, I think, is more of a touchdown-dependent kind of desperation play. We'll see. We'll see how much Gesicki gets involved in week one. If you can avoid this tight end room in week one, I would, just because we don't exactly know how that split's going to work out. All right, moving on to the Dolphins at the Chargers. I would say that your starters here, Raheem Mostert, obviously A-Chain's going to be involved with no Jeff Wilson, but I think Mostert has kind of a middle to low floor, low ceiling combo, honestly. Not a huge believer in him, to be honest. I believe in this guy, as you can see by the highlight here, that I think A-Chain's going to be the most valuable running back on this roster. On the other side of it, obviously Austin Eckler, great player, great fantasy option. For the receivers, it's Hill, it's Waddle, it's Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams is, of course, boom or bust. We know that, but I think he should likely make your roster at the very least as a flex. With the tight ends, Gerald Everett, there are rumors that Kellen Mond is really good at getting the tight end involved. We'll see if that comes to fruition here. I think he is a starting consideration at that position, but it doesn't take much. So that's that. Moving on to the Rams at the Seahawks. Ken Walker. This projection here between Walker and Charbonnet doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think Walker is going to be taking the majority of the carries, the majority of the touches. I think, honestly, it's going to be more reminiscent to what we saw from last night with the Lions. and I don't think Charbonnet is as explosive as a playmaker as Jahmyr Gibbs in the passing game. So I'm really not feeling this projection here. I'd like to honestly wait and see how he does in week 1 before starting him. Walker, he's a no-brainer starter. Akers, I think he's a flex consideration. He can definitely burn you, and he's shown that over the course of his career, but he does have the upside to put some good numbers up. So I think you can flex him going into week 1. Now, onto the receivers. No Cooper Kupp makes this side of the board look pretty bad, pretty sad. Van Jefferson projected 8.5 fantasy points. You got to have better options going into week 1. It's got to be a pretty deep league for you to be digging into your bag for Van Jefferson. So I'm going to avoid all of these guys going to week 1 if I can. Metcalf and Lockett, I think, are, again, lock-in starters. Smith and Jigba, I want to see how that wrist performs in-game. The surgically repaired wrist, it is on his non-dominant hand, so that helps. But either way, I think that is a little too risky for week 1, in my opinion. For the tight ends, Higbee, there's where your fantasy points are at in this offense, at least as a receiver. I'm good with you starting him. I like him to be a top 10 option all season, like season long this year. So I'm good with that. Noah Fant just hasn't really gotten it put together in Seattle, and I don't expect that to really change, especially with the addition of Smith and Jigba. So there's probably better options out there than Noah Fant for you. All right, moving on to Sunday Night Football, Cowboys at Giants. Pollard is the guy. I'm really not expecting Rico Dowdell or Deuce Vaughn to be taking a lot of touches, a lot of snaps from Pollard. I think he's going to be the guy. He's going to be the workhorse. That's my expectation for him. On the other side, Saquon Barkley, of course, top 5 running back for me. The receivers in this game, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, I'm good with both of those guys. I'd like to see it from Michael Gallup before I throw him in my flex, personally. The receivers on the Giants, this room's looking pretty slim, similar to the last game we saw with the Rams. And honestly, it is very similar when you look at the tight end numbers. Darren Waller projects to be the highest scoring fantasy receiver of the team. I wouldn't be surprised if that occurred at all. And then with Jake Ferguson, rookie tight end, he's got competition with Lamb, Cooks, and potentially Gallup. So I'm going to hold off on starting Ferguson until I see it from him. All right, and then last game of the slate. Bills at Jets on Monday night. So, Breece Hall, let's talk about this. The running back split, I think, is going to be predominantly Dalvin Cook, honestly. They've talked all offseason, the Jets have, about easing Breece Hall back into the offense. Dalvin Cook is fully healthy, was really good last season, a top 12 running back, and he should handle the majority of the workload in this backfield to start the season. And I think you should capitalize on that. Throw him in your lineup. Breece Hall, he's got upside. I'm not arguing that. But I think that the fact that he is coming off of that major injury, it's going to limit him early on. I mean, you'd be foolish not to think so. On the other side, James Cook versus Cook. Brothers, if you didn't know. But yeah, this number here, this breakdown, I'm a little nervous. I think honestly, Damian Harris he's gonna find the end zone. To be honest with you, former Patriot, we saw what he did there. I think it was 14 touchdowns in a 15 rushing touchdowns in 2021. So the guy has a nose for the end zone. Obviously, James Cook, I'm not convinced on him. If you watch my running back rankings video, I kind of talked about how we didn't learn our lesson drafting him high as a rookie and then even higher as a sophomore after he didn't prove it last year. So not a huge James Cook believer. I think he's a good player. I just don't think he really is in the right situation to capitalize in fantasy. And it's largely due in part to Josh Allen as the scrambling quarterback that he is. So with that being said, I think you can flex Cook. I wouldn't feel good about it, I'm not starting Damian Harris, despite what I said about him finding the end zone. I think that's more of a DFS play than a fantasy season-long play. The receivers here, obviously, Diggs is your guy. Gabe Davis is kind of the cutoff point for me, where I'm like, if I'm down going into Monday night and I have Gabe Davis, I'm probably playing him because of that upside, but he could just as easily burn me because he is pretty boom or bust. On the other side of this game, Garrett Wilson is obviously going to be a starter for your fantasy roster. Allen Lazard, I think, can be flexed if you need him to be. He was a pretty consistent double-digit performer last season on the Packers. He's got the same quarterback, so that works in his benefit. And then on to the tight ends here. Dalton Kincaid being a rookie, they got a lot of hype on that guy, saying that he's going to be like the slot receiver for this team. I'd like to see it happen first before I start him. Dawson Knox is still there. He's not going away. And honestly, between the two, I'd avoid both if possible. With Tyler Conklin, kind of the same thing. He just seems like he's too low on the depth chart to make a huge impact on a consistent basis. So probably in any of the other games that I've listed already, there's a better tight end option for you to start on your fantasy team. So with that being said, hopefully you enjoyed the video, learned a few things, and good luck in your matchups this week, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.